Welcome to the Friday Circle podcast, a collection of Islamic reminders and circles to recharge your iman.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wal aqibatu muttaqin, was salatu was salamu ala rasulil anbiya wal mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. So firstly, I'd like to thank the organizers and everyone else for accommodating me, facilitating myself coming here. It is actually quite humbling. I know it's normally quite customary to say something of the sort, but it really is quite humbling. I mean, out of the many shuyukh, especially when you've got Sheikh Faraz and so forth, there's not really a need to call anyone else. That's the truth of it. That's the dead honest truth. But nevertheless, I am actually humbled and very appreciative of it. Today's class, or session rather, is in regards to Imam Bukhari, but it's not really an overview of his biography. It's not really looking at his whole life. It is aspects of his life, and essentially the title is "Why is he so special?" Now, that's quite subjective to ask that, because ultimately the only objective answer belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is Al-Alim, He is all-knowing. Only Allah knows as to why He elevated the ranks of Imam Bukhari. So my answers are going to be somewhat subjective and limited by the constraints of time as well. So my aim is to just cast some light over his life, take and extrapolate certain lessons from his life itself. Not necessarily go over in a biography fashion, because for that we'll need multiple sessions, and that elongates the whole thing. So inshallah, we'll try to cover it within the 45 minutes or so, because then I have to go back to lead Maghrib Salah, inshallah. In regards to why it's so special, Imam Bukhari, there are many ways of answering that. I think one of the ways to generally answer that is forget Imam Bukhari's time for now. Just look at his legacy right now. That's the end answer of it. I mean, no khutbah can be delivered, no tafsir class, seerah class, even aqidah. Doesn't matter what subject is within the remit of Islamic context, you have to refer back to the work of Imam Bukhari. And at the moment, I'm just talking about the Sahih of Imam Bukhari, but he has many other works. He's authored more than 20 works, which many have been lost due to history, or to history itself, but he has authored many works, and them being vital works of that as well. But just the work of Sahih Bukhari, even though that's not his actual name, the book, just that work itself, it has to be referenced in every single circle, whether it's someone that's an imam, a sheikh, someone that's given da'wah, anyone that's wanting to learn about Islam, anyone that's wanting to learn how to pray, anyone that wants to learn about Islamic beliefs or mannerisms, anything, you always revert to some way, either directly by opening the books or indirectly by learning something about Islam via a sheikh or something else of the sort, is always going back to Imam Bukhari. Now, why that's significant is because, ultimately speaking, as the hadith suggests, but rather teaches, anyone that does any goodness, then a person who has shown the way to that goodness, he has a share of that reward. He or she has that share of reward. So it's very hard, or it's essentially impossible to compete with Imam Bukhari's legacy, in the sense that no matter what we've done or no matter what we learn, ultimately speaking, Imam Bukhari is going to get a share of that reward. As the hadith from Abu Dawood mentions, that anyone that is guided towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even as one single person, and that's greater for you than a herd of red camels. That's one person, but here you're talking about millions of people from the time of Imam Bukhari all the way until now, and for anyone that's to come until the Day of Judgment, Allah willing. So it's that in of itself, in a nutshell, just closes the session, and that's the end of today's session. Essentially, I mean, now I'm messing around, but it's the truth of it. I know this sounds somewhat generic, and again, because of time constraints, I'm being quite general, but really think about it. You know, any marriage that's fruitful due to any of the sunnahs of the Prophet ﷺ, well, that comes down to Bukhari. Anytime you are practicing any kind of good character, well, that comes down to Imam Bukhari. He has a share of that reward. When you learn to smile, when you're spreading that salam, when you're enjoining in terms of unity, when you're praying the way you pray, all of that comes down to Imam Bukhari. Of course, many other shuyukh are involved in that effort as well, but Imam Bukhari has a significant and massive role in that. And just in case someone's thinking, well, I study Sahih Muslim, or I read Tirmidhi, or I read Nasai, or leaving Abu Dawood to aside for a moment, or Ibn Majah, well, they were his students. So the circle comes back around. Same with Sahih ibn Khuzaymah. Many other scholars were impacted by Imam Bukhari directly because they were his students. So that's, again, another topic in itself, just because Imam Bukhari himself says he had more than 1,000 teachers. So Hence why you understand why I'm not going to go over his biography in a biography fashion, because we'll be stuck on his teachers for some weeks. Nevertheless, there are some facts to move forward. There are some facts that we should be familiar with in regards to Imam Bukhari, his name, his date of birth, and so forth. So his name is Muhammad. His name was Muhammad, son of Ismail, son of Ibrahim, son of Mughira, who is son of Bardizbah. So Bardizbah is being his great-great-grandfather, who wasn't a Muslim. They were from a Persian descent. They were farmers essentially. His son Mughira, so the great-grandfather of Imam Bukhari, he accepted Islam at the hands of the Ju'fi tribe. So sometimes when you read about Imam Bukhari, you will say that at the end of it, it will say Ju'fi. That's only because it was customary at whoever hands you accepted Islam, you take their tribe name because they are responsible for you. They would teach you the ways of Islam and so forth. So not to say he was actually from the Ju'fi tribe. That was something that I wanted to mention just in case someone's reading his work or about his life. So although his name was Muhammad, son of Ismail, he was commonly known at the time as Abu Abdullah, because everyone, or it was very common to have a title, and that would normally suggest Abu something. Not that he had a child by the name of Abdullah, especially at that young age. But so I will sometimes refer to him as Muhammad, son of Ismail, or just Abu Abdullah, just so that we're familiar and just to remind ourselves of that. Of course, later on he became known as Imam Bukhari, and Bukhara is the place that he was born in. So he was born in the year 194 AH, so 194 AH after Hijrah. That was the year he was born in the month of Shawwal. Now there's a different opinion as to whether it was 13th or 14th of Shawwal. It was, some scholars mentioned, after the Asra. Nevertheless, it is in the year 194 AH, in the month of Shawwal. I know I'm going through this quite quickly. I don't mean it in any bad way, just conscious of the time itself. But during the time of Imam Bukhari's life, as a hadith scholar, he was known as Imam Bukhari, but he was primarily known in two ways. One is Imam al-Muhaddithin, the Imam of all hadith scholars, and the second was Imam al-Mu'mineen fil hadith, that the Imam of the believers in the field of hadith. Now that's just Imam Bukhari's just general biography in terms of where he was born, in the city of Bukhara, and when he was born. But the story of Imam Bukhari's specialness and his special quality starts before Imam Bukhari itself. And I say this for good reason, which I will provide evidence from the Quran and from my thought process anyway. Starting from his father, Ismail. Ismail being his father, who was also known as Abu Hassan, he was actually a hadith narrator himself. Not the grandest of hadith scholars, but he narrated hadith and he dabbled in hadith quite a bit. And he met quite some significant great hadith scholars himself. At the same time, he was a very wealthy businessman, a very successful businessman. So he had accomplished two things. That's not what makes him special. Although there are special qualities, but what I want to pick on is something that he said on his deathbed, which is, and he is narrated about him that when he was on his deathbed, he mentioned that any of his wealth that he's acquired, there's not a single iota worth of doubt inside it, let alone that wealth being haram. That's out of the question. None of it is even doubtful. Now, this is quite significant because for those of us that work, when we really get into the nitty-gritty details of things, there's always something that's quite questionable. Not trying to insinuate that there's any haram income that we have, but there's always some company that's doing some kind of riba on the side or anything else they earn wealth through some insurance means or whatever else, which has some impact. Not necessarily passing a fatwa here, far from, but I'm just trying to give the idea that it was a very big statement for Imam Bukhari's father to make. It wasn't a small thing. And that causes barakah to come in the household. Hold on, bear with me, I'll bring to you the lesson. That is what I want to mention about his father. In regards to his mother, it is said, he's actually one of the teachers of Bukhari, Imam Bukhari that is, he mentions that his mother was a very pious person. It's not mentioned as to what her name was, not a lot of detail, but she was someone that would supplicate, worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quite with a lot of devotion, to say the least. To the point that is narrating the story that Imam Bukhari, whilst he was young, he became quite ill and he lost his eyesight. And his mother, as any mother would, any father would continuously make dua. His father had passed away whilst Imam Bukhari was very, very young. So, of course, single mother, he was an orphan essentially. So the mother would continuously make dua, continuously cry, make dua, give sadaqah and so forth. Until one night, it is narrated by the teacher of Imam Bukhari that she saw a dream wherein the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam approached and gave her glad tidings that because of your supplication towards, because of your passion and the way you supplicated towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah has restored the eyesight of Imam Bukhari. Of course, Imam Bukhari was known as Muhammad at the time, but that's one of the incidents mentioned in one of the narrations. Why I mention this is because when any child or any family, when the parents are somewhat pious, or at least pious is somewhat a relative term, they are conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they have taqwa, they are conscious and more aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah brings that barakah into the household. And to provide evidence of my thinking why I say this is because in Surah Al-Kahf, go back to Surah Al-Kahf, the story between Musa and who's the other person? Khidr, right? I only asked you just not as a test, just to keep everyone awake. Okay, so between Musa and Khidr, of course, the story is quite long and it's a very fascinating story in of itself. But one of the things that takes place is that Khidr decides to reinforce a wall. And when Musa questioned it later on, he explains that had that wall fallen, that wealth that was underneath, that treasure underneath, that it belonged to 2 orphans, that would have been taken by the people. And Allah basically essentially somehow revealed to Khidr to reinforce the wall. And Allah provides an explanation as to why He made that decision. Allah says inside the Quran, verse number 82 of Surah Kahf, وَكَانَ أَبُوهُمَا صَالِحًا, that their father was a righteous man. So because of their father being a righteous man, Allah has decided to take care of the orphan's needs. And a similar thing you will find with Imam Bukhari, that his father and mother being very, very conscious people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you would find that Imam Bukhari's needs, especially in terms of wealth, were taken care of. So it goes a long way. We sometimes not undervalue, but we forget the value of barakah itself and how far barakah can take a person or a family in that matter. So this is one of the things I wanted to highlight, but not go on too long because there are many other points to come. The other one point I wanted to mention was in regards to taqwa. Again, a taqwa is a broad term, being conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in Surah Talaq, verse number 2, Allah says, وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. That when someone is conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah creates for them an exit way. Allah creates for them a path out of things. He creates a path for them. And wherever that need may be, towards something or away from something. And that's one of the benefits of taqwa out of the many. And again, you'll find that with Imam Bukhari's family, whilst he's being brought up, it's difficult enough in today's world when even though we have the wealth care system, the healthcare system and so forth, and the way that we do, a single mother bring up 2 children because he had another brother as well, is tough enough. But that too, to get it perfectly right, having the result of Imam Bukhari as he was, that's another story in of itself. So barakah goes a long way. We're only at the beginning, so you get an idea. He's only a child; he's only just been born, so you get an idea of Imam Bukhari's life and the lessons that there are. So going on, fast forwarding some years, Imam Bukhari, he mentions himself as to when he was inspired to learn hadith. He mentions to his companions that he was inspired to learn hadith at the age of 10, and he says that I left school and went to dedicate myself to hadith studies. Now, a little point here. No one leaves school, okay, for any reason whatsoever. That's not what I'm mentioning. That's not what I'm preaching here. But Imam Bukhari, he left school and totally devoted himself to hadith. Now, there's quite a few important issues here. You will find that Imam Bukhari was very focused. He was very focused in hadith studies, and I'll explain this through some incidents in his life. And this could come from a few places, which I'll come on to later on, about archery. I'll come on to that later on. But just to give you an idea, as the years or time went on, an incident took place in his life. He had a teacher, Sheikh Dakhili, so a great scholar. He was inside his lessons and he was narrating hadith. So whenever I mention hadith in today's context, in today's lesson, by hadith, I mean not just the wording of the Prophet's narration, but also the chain of narration. So whenever you use the word hadith today, it will refer to both the chain of narration and the actual words of the Prophet. So for example, the teacher would say, so-and-so person heard from so-and-so person who heard from the Prophet and he said this. So the teacher was teaching hadith and he was narrating some of the chain of narrations here. As so-and-so person heard from so-and-so person. Imam Bukhari corrected his teacher and said, well, this person did not narrate from this person. So the teacher was actually quite humble about it, and he didn't just refuse him, but they had a discourse of some sort, and he eventually went back home. He eventually went back home to check his notes, because none of the shuyukh used to carry their notes with them. That was seen as something, you're dependent on your notes. But the teacher went home, he checked his notes and he tested Imam Bukhari to say, well, you tell me what is the correction. And Imam Bukhari told him the correction, and Shaykh Dakhili mentioned that, Imam Muhammad, you're correct. What you say is true. Now that's not fascinating, although it is fascinating that learning hadith in of itself is a big task in of itself. Then learning and remember the chain and narrated is honestly a mission. It's honestly really, really hard, because sometimes you have people with the same names and they're all different people. So it's a big thing. I don't want to digress into that topic of itself, but it's a very tough topic. What I find fascinating is he was only 11 years old when this happened. So that means there was only 1 year of him, engrossing himself in this hadith study, that he got to this rank. And you get people that study Sharia today for 10, 11 years, and they may easily not get to that stage. I'm not putting anyone down for that matter, but it goes to show the excellence of Imam Bukhari himself. As to, that's just 1 year's worth of study. Now do that and consider how far Imam Bukhari actually reached after decades worth of studying. So it just gives you an idea. And likewise, you'll get quite a few other incidents. And I'll go over a few incidents just to highlight his intelligence and his greatness in terms of hadith studies. When he was still young, he would sometimes, of course, as all people would, they would travel from place to place. So him and some other students, they actually traveled to Basra. They traveled to Basra, and Bukhara is where he's from. Basra is quite a distance. I can't tell you the miles, but it is quite a bit of a distance. So when he went to class, and he was still very young at this time, in his teenage years, he never took notes. So all other students, they would talk between themselves at first, but then eventually they had enough, and they tried being nice to Imam Bukhari about it at first. They're like, what's the point of you coming? We've traveled from so far away, and we've come for a certain amount of time. The teacher's teaching so much hadith, so many hadith every single day, and you're not taking any notes. And for anyone that's ever seen hadith classes, you don't have the time to lift up your head. I remember I actually did this once, for a moment. I did it in daydream. I just finished taking my notes. I picked my head up for a moment, and my teacher told me off, because, are you not going to take notes? Do you think you know it? I was like, from that time, I just never raised my head. But nevertheless, that was actually a Bukhari lesson as well. But the point being is, you're continuously writing notes. And these students, for a few days, every time they were returning home, for a few days, they actually kept on, not pestering him, but in some way pestering, and knowing that, look, what's the point of you coming? What's the point of you being? You're wasting your time, you're wasting money. After 16 days, Imam Bukhari had enough. And he said, take out your notes. Take out all your notes and tell me what you've learned. Of course, they didn't go over the hadith. He said, let me tell you everything. And by that time, the companions, the people around, they said that we had covered in those 16 days, 15,000 hadith. He started from day one until the end. He kept on narrating. And he did not need any notes whatsoever. Of course, now we know, and subhanAllah, of course, now we call that photographic memory, but that's besides the point. I'll come back to photographic memory later on. But it's the fact that you get an idea of how intelligent he was. You get an idea from that. And there's many other incidents like that. And that was only 16 days of study. And as a matter of fact, those companions that narrate the story, they said that we corrected our notes from him narrating. So subhanAllah, he was absolutely phenomenal. I'm going to keep using the word he was amazing, just because I'm actually somewhat flabbergasted as to what to say about him. How do you describe someone who has photographic memory, and that too in hadith studies, and used it in the correct way as well? It is very few words to describe him. And as time went on, he of course continued to study. He continued, and he was completely focused on his hadith studies. From morning till night, he was very focused on his hadith studies. At the age of 16, he went to travel for Hajj with his mother and his brother. They returned home because he decided to stay in Mecca and continue with his studies. His brother and his mother returned home. Within 2 years, he mentions, actually even before him, actually I'm not going to go into it, I'm going to go into another issue. But basically in those 2 years, he had accomplished quite a lot. By the time he was 18, he wrote his first book, Qada al-Sahaba wa Tabi'een, which is the judgments and the fiqh of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een. Now before him writing it, he mentions that I had completely essentially mastered the field of fiqh. Now someone to do that by the age of 18 is a big thing of itself. When we were at the age of 18, what did we do? Don't answer that. I know what I did, and it's not something to be answered. But for those that have not reached the age of 18, then what do you think you're going to be doing by that age? And for those that did, just don't answer and just reflect over that time. Imam Bukhari, though, was writing books. He had already started writing books, and that too on a very tough topic, the judgments of the Sahaba and Tabi'in. You have to have, for anyone that's ever tried authoring something, you know that it's quite tough authoring anything because it's going to be open to scrutiny, especially Imam Bukhari as well. It's going to be open to scrutiny. So, but he wrote something. Now, unfortunately, that was lost to history, as many of his books were. But then later he wrote other books as well, which were, again, on tough topics, the chain of narrations and many other issues of aqeedah and everything else. Nevertheless, time goes by. He's not famous yet because he's only learning at the moment. And his travels consisted of quite a few places. Now, remember I mentioned his father was quite wealthy. He inherited a large deal of wealth, and he himself was a businessman. But what he would do is that he would invest into startup companies, not the exact words that they used at the time, but he would invest into projects, and he was like a silent partner. He didn't necessarily work, but he would be taking a share of the business. So that's how he accumulated his wealth. Now, whilst he was somewhat wealthy, he made sacrifices as well. He normally used his wealth for charity, which we'll come on to, and also for traveling. So by the time he's traveled to X destination, he sometimes never had any money left. Sometimes when we talk about Imam Bukhari, whilst we talk about it in the context of everything being merry, everything being marvelous, he himself mentions that there were times where he did not have any clothes, and his friends had to buy him clothes because he had spent all his money on acquiring knowledge. As a matter of fact, there was an incident, this happened quite a few times, where he would resort to eating grass or hay, dry grass. He did that for days, and at times he was taken to doctors, and his doctors mentioned that everything's become dry because you haven't had much food for a very long time. So they came at a great deal of sacrifice, and that's the marriage of knowledge. Knowledge always comes with a cost, and that cost having to be some form of sacrifice, whether it be of wealth, of time, or of anything else. Sometimes we talk about Imam Bukhari in a very merry terms of, he just traveled and he was so intelligent, which was true, but we forget the other side of things as well. And it did come at a great deal of a cost. Not to say that knowledge isn't worth, of course it is. Just to mention a few other points in regards to his intelligence and some of the things that took place, which were quite interesting. As time grew, of course, he traveled to places like Egypt, Syria, to Basra, Baghdad, all across the Arabian Peninsula. And across those travels, many times people wanted to test him. Who's this Imam Bukhari? Many scholars, and again, like I said before, he had over 1,000 teachers. The likes of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, when he was very young, when he met Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, the great hadith master. At that time, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, he said that I've never seen anyone like Imam Bukhari from the place of Khurasan. Scholars say, had he given him another few more years, and had Imam Ahmad lived for another few years, he would have said there would have been no other scholar like him at all. There were many scholars that did say words like that, though. Nevertheless, when he went to Baghdad on one occasions, people really wanted to test him, and them being scholars as well. Like, is Imam Bukhari really that intelligent? Or are they exaggerated stories? So what they did, they devised a plan that, look, we're going to test them. There was 10 sheikhs, and they were hadith scholars themselves. They all had 10 narrations. When I say again, 10 narrations meaning the hadith and the chain of narrations. What they essentially did is that they didn't meddle with the hadith, the wording of the Prophet ﷺ, but they meddled with the chain of narrations. They changed things around, but they didn't do it in a way where it was obvious. They had some things that would put someone off. For most scholars, they would not notice the difference. So what essentially happened, cut the story short, they called Imam Bukhari and they said, have you heard this hadith? And one person would start and he would say one narration. Imam Bukhari would, no, I've not heard this. He would say the second narration, the third, the fourth. So he would say all 10, and all 10 people would say all 10 narrations, equating to 100 narrations. So after all this, like, Imam Bukhari isn't actually that intelligent. He didn't know the hadith. He didn't, figure out the defects in the hadith. After this, Imam Bukhari says, now's my turn to speak. You said this narration, but the actual narration is this, and the actual chain narration is this. So what was Hafiz ibn Hajar Asqalani, who wrote the famous commentary to Bukhari, he says, what's interesting is not that he picked out the defects, which is tough enough as itself, but the fact that just by hearing the wrong one, once he memorized it straight away. He knew it, and he was able to recall it. And that's the intelligence of Imam Bukhari. Hence why I say, I'm amazed by Imam Bukhari, and again, I don't know how to introduce Imam Bukhari properly, because there's very few words that can give his due respect to him. And the same happened in Samarkand. In Samarkand, when he traveled there were 400 scholars, if not more, that wanted to test him in a similar manner. they did a similar thing of testing in a similar way. Again, 400 scholars testing it themselves, but he was able to do it. And it's mentioned that he never ever made a mistake. So things like this could be continuous. And again, Imam Bukhari became very famous for it. I want to pause it for a moment because remember, today is not about essentially a biography of Imam Bukhari, but rather some lessons. And I want to pause it for a moment on the topic of seeking knowledge. You see, again, I'm not going to digress on this topic because it's something that we hear many a times, but just a few things. Seeking knowledge, like alhamdulillah, you've come here. Don't think of it as something small. In hadith is mentioned in Sahih Muslim that man salaka tariqan yaltamisu fihi ilman sahala Allahu tariqan ila al-jannah. That anyone that goes out to seek knowledge, then Allah makes the path towards Jannah easy upon him. SubhanAllah, that's amazing. In Sunan al-Darimi is actually mentioned about a person who spends some time after Isha Salah to study and teach the deen, then is as if he spent the whole night worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah's given that excellence to knowledge. Learning knowledge or teaching knowledge, either way. You have the famous hadith of Bukhari. Again, Bukhari. Now, man yuridillahu bihi khayran yufaqqih fi ad-din. And when Allah intends goodness for someone, Allah rewards him and Allah gives him an understanding of the religion. Allah allows him to take benefit from seeking knowledge. Allah says in the Quran, هَلْ يَسْتَوِي الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. That are the people who have knowledge and do not have knowledge, are they equal? Of course not. And what makes knowledge important and what gives it its value is not being more cleverer. Accumulating information is not that great. That's not the important part. That's not what elevates a person's status. It's when you are able to act upon that knowledge, when you are able to what's what I'm looking for? Make it something which is apparent in terms of actions. You're able to manifest that through your words or actions, whatever it may be. Allah says in the Quran, and this is for me one of the most important parts. Allah says in Surah Fatir, verse number 28, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهُ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَا. That indeed the ones who are fearful of Allah are the ulama. Ulama not means scholars in today's words. Ulama, people of knowledge. That's essentially the role of knowledge, that it brings you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So many times what happens is that we learn, some people they learn Islamic knowledge, but it's in the context of evading certain practices. Do I have to do certain things? Do I have to read my sunnahs? Am I sinful if I let go of them? That's not the purpose of knowledge. The purpose is that if I do this, will it bring me closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, when he would ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for knowledge, he would ask for ilm nafiya, beneficial knowledge. So it's very, very important and it's imperative that when we do ask for knowledge, when we make dua for knowledge, it's done for beneficial knowledge. And look inside the Quran, in Surah Jummah. In Surah Jummah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He makes mention of the past nations. And He mentions about how people, they are like donkeys because they would accumulate wealth, but they wouldn't practice it. It wouldn't manifest itself in any way whatsoever. So it's a warning for us that do not be like such people. Allah save us from that. And like I mentioned before, again, knowledge comes with a sacrifice. Whatever that sacrifice is, whether, of course, alhamdulillah, you've sacrificed time, Allah accept it. But it will come with some form of sacrifice or the other. And there was a famous thing, I remember we were students learning hadith, our teachers mentioned that knowledge is quite stingy. You can devote your whole life towards it, but will only give a part of itself to you. It's like one of the worst relationships that you could be in, because any relationship, if you've given yourself wholly to someone, you expect something back. Whereas knowledge, you can give your whole life towards it, but then you've only accumulated a small amount of knowledge. There's some things that many things that you're not going to know. Although Imam Bukhari was somewhat different in many ways, but it's something for us as a reminder. And on that topic, now I'll come on to a few other things other than knowledge itself, which is important, I believe. See, it's very few people that have photographic memory. Remember I mentioned I'll come back to photographic memory. So this is what I wanted to mention. Very few people have photographic memory, but let's not miss the point. The lesson to learn is whatever gift Allah's given to us, whatever blessing Allah's blessed us with, the question isn't about what the blessing is, more about how do we use that blessing in order to become closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what makes Imam Bukhari special. Since there are many people, not many, but there are a few people in this world that do have photographic memory, that's not what's special. What's special is about how a person uses it. That's what makes Imam Bukhari special as well. So whilst we may not become superheroes, be able to have beams coming out of our eyes and so forth, but we may have a blessing of wealth. We may have a blessing of some free time, maybe some physical health, or maybe we're good in certain subjects. The question that we want to ask is, how do I use this blessing in order to become close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And Imam Ghazali touches upon this, about gratitude. Remember the Quran mentions, لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ, that if you are grateful, then Allah will surely and definitely increase you in your gifts, in your blessings. So how do we attain it? The question is, what is gratitude? How do we become grateful? Imam Ghazali, he gives different stages of gratitude. I don't want to go through it because of time, and I have a few other things I want to get to, but essentially speaking, the third and the greatest level of gratitude is when we are gifted a gift by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatever that blessing may be, but we're not just appreciative of the blessing, and we're not just appreciative that Allah's remembered us of that blessing, which is normally the case. When we hear the khutbahs, we're normally reminded that be appreciative that Allah's given you the gift. Imam Ghazali said that's only the second stage of gratitude. The third stage is you asking yourself, how can I use this blessing in order to become closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That's the ultimate form of gratitude. And then from there, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then will increase you in your blessing. So that's the thing that we want to remember. Imam Bukhari, through his intellect, through his photographic memory, served the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We need to ask ourselves, how am I going to serve the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? One of the things that I learned recently, and I never really reflected upon this myself, it's just a reflection, but it's not a tafsir or a hadith or anything of the sort. But the truth of the matter is that the service of deen will be taken by someone. That train will definitely leave. The question is that, are we going to jump on that train? If we're not going to take, if that service of deen is not going to be taken by us, Allah will choose someone else. And look back inside the Quran. Many parts of the Quran, there are animals or insects that are mentioned. But notice that many a times, for example, the ababil, the ankabut, the spider, the birds that are mentioned in the Quran, they were taken in the stories are mentioned in context of servicing the deen of Allah subhanahu, whether it be protecting the Kaaba, whether it be protecting the Prophet when he was doing his hijrah, or anything else of that sort. So if Allah does not find mankind, if there's no mankind is ready to give service to the deen, Allah will take it from the animals. The deen of Allah will continue until the day of judgment, whether we're there or not. The question is, are we going to service? Are we going to step up and board that train? And we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, take that service of deen from us. Ameen. So again, like I said, I'm only going to gloss over some of these lessons just because, let's look at the time. 15 minutes. Okay, now we're going to start racing through it, okay? So there's a couple of things I wanted to mention about his piety, character and taqwa. So I mentioned about his archery, and I said I'll come back to it. So why I brought up this topic of archery is because one of his extracurricular activities was archery. I'm not promoting any archery classes here, but it's said that he rarely missed a target ever in his life. He was extremely good at it. I think only 2 or 3 times he missed his target, apparently is mentioned. One of those times I'll mention shortly, inshallah. But the reason I wanted to bring it up is because sometimes scholars, they say that it's possible that he learned his dedication and his persistence from his archery lessons as well when he was young. Because any discipline, for example, martial arts, boxing, kickboxing, whatever it may be, it's not just about physical activity, but it's all about a discipline. That yes, you're not that flexible now, you're not that strong now, you're not able to learn, you don't have this skill under your belt right now, but with persistence and that tenacity, you will get over and you will overcome these hurdles. You will overcome these obstacles, you'll master these skills. And the same thing with hadith studies. It's very, very tough. Especially the level that Imam Bukhari got to, but with that level of tenacity, with that level of persistence and endurance, a person gets onto. That's why I brought up the topic of archery, because sometimes scholars, they mention that it has a link towards it. And the other reason why I bring up archery is to show his taqwa, because that's the one thing I wanted to focus on now as well, his level of character, piety and taqwa, how he was conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's mentioned that once he was on his travels, and they were having some fun doing some archery, and whilst doing so he damaged some wood, so he damaged something. It wasn't a major damage, just a natural damage. And Imam Bukhari returned, but he was constantly worried. His companions and friends said that we could see in his face that he was worried. And he called all of us and he said, look, I need a favor. Find out who this belongs to, because I can't find out. Who does this wood belong to? This is a little thing that I've damaged. And if you do find out, send the message that I seek forgiveness from him and I'm willing to pay for it. And eventually they located who that person was. The person replied essentially saying that, look, Imam Bukhari, everything that I have is for you. Everything that I own is for you. Don't worry about that. Imam Bukhari, when they told Imam Bukhari about this, they said that his face lit up, and out of happiness, he narrated 500 hadiths to strangers. He just started narrating hadiths as his way of thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, showing his thanks, and he donated 300 dirhams to the people, which is a large amount. On the topic of charity and him being pious and so forth, it is mentioned that he would regularly give charity on a regular basis. But just to show you how he wasn't fazed by wealth. A businessman knows the subject of wealth. Sometimes in tafsir class I spoke about fake spirituality. I'll give you an example. It's easy for us to say, I'm not bothered about the world, I'm not after the wealth, especially when you're not earning 100k or so. Okay? When you're in that position, then it's a bit harder to say, I'm not bothered about the wealth doesn't mean to me. When you're earning that, then if you say it has some substance to it, I'm not ridiculing anyone or belittling anyone's efforts for that matter. But Imam Bukhari was a businessman, he had wealth, but at the same time he was able to divorce himself, and I'll show you that through a narration, an incident. He was traveling along a ship once, a famous incident too. Someone was talking to him and found out that he had about 10,000 dirhams with him, which is a large amount of wealth in today's terms, even then. And basically this person, he devised a plan that, I'm going to complain to the crewmen that my 10,000 dirhams have gone missing. So when they start searching people, they're going to find Imam Bukhari, and then, I'll get that wealth off him. What happened when they started searching everyone, Imam Bukhari decided, without anyone realizing or without anyone looking, he threw that money into the sea. So this person, subhanAllah, he came back to Imam Bukhari and says, look, what did you do with the wealth? Where did you hide it? Because I saw you with the bag of wealth, I know you had the wealth, what did you do with it? He goes, do you think I'm going to jeopardize the integrity of the hadith that I've been working so hard for, just for some wealth? And he threw it away. He was able to do that for the sake of wealth. And tried put that into today's context. Would we give up our job for the sake of something that we believe in? To hold some truth up, to hold some integrity there. It's a very tough thing to do. He was able to do that. So it just shows his character. And there's many other examples. I have a whole page worth of examples to get through. But again, I do want to get to the end of his life as well. But just a few things about things, and I'll just shorten down the passages. Is mentioned in the month of Ramadan. He would speak louder. Oh, no problem. Yeah, he should have mentioned that before. Sorry. So it's mentioned in regards to his Ramadan, that in Ramadan, during the day, he would recite one completion of the Quran in the day. And after the Taraweeh prayers, he would, in his tahajjud or in his night prayers, he would pray 1/3 of the Quran in his night prayers. It goes to show his dedication. He wasn't just someone that's focused on hadith and nothing else. He had a routine of worship as well, and he dedicated himself in that worship. He was focused on always building a legacy, which will be one of our points I'll come on to later on. And I'll demonstrate one of the incidents. Once when he went back to Bukhara, his hometown, in Bukhara he built something, I can't recall exactly what it was, but it was something that was to serve the community, that was of benefit of the community, of some building. I can't remember what exactly it was. And when he started to do the bricklaying work himself, so his friends and companions and students, they said, Imam Bukhari, you should have told us, we would have helped you with this. He said, no, this is for my akhirah, this is for me to attain rewards once I'm gone. So it goes to show his mentality. He didn't attain his level of good deeds just because of being clever, but he had a mentality of leaving a legacy behind. He was thinking about leaving something behind so that would be continuous reward. And we know the famous hadith of 3 things are left behind when a person, for example, one of the things I mentioned is knowledge which benefits people continuously. That will be something that you will be rewarded for even though you've left the world. And Imam Bukhari was conscious of that. He made investments. We think about investments into Bitcoin and everything else, not talking about the validity of these things. Don't want to get into that topic either. But we talk about investments in this world. But what about the investments once we left this world of getting these then? whether it be by building a well, whatever it might be. But Imam Bukhari was very conscious of it. And I mentioned, one of the things I find fascinating is that Imam Bukhari mentions that one of the things I'm hopeful for when I meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that He will never reprimand me for backbiting anyone, because I've never backbitten anyone. That's hard to say. That's hard to say for any one of us. Myself firstly, that Imam Bukhari himself said this. So a lot of these things that I say will be either Imam Bukhari mentioning, or Imam Dhahabi in his Sir A'lam al-Nubala, or Hafiz ibn Hajar Asqalani in his introduction to his commentary, Muqaddim al-Fath anyway. I just thought I'd mention that. It's a valid question, and again, I'm happy to take any questions. But again, I know that's a bit forward anyway, so. Okay, 7 odd minutes. What I wanted to mention here, one of the lessons I wanted to mention was in him internalizing that knowledge. That whatever knowledge he had, he acted upon it, and he was able to manifest that through his actions and through his taqwa and piety. There were many other things that did happen in his life, but we will leave that to a side, because I do want to get to the end of his life. You see, what happens with the end of his life is, we normally speak about Imam Bukhari in terms of, like I said before, merry terms, that it was all glorious and people throwing roses at his feet, which at times did happen. Not necessarily roses being thrown, but he had that high elevated rank, and people respected him, people loved him. As a matter of fact, towards the end of his life, and just introducing the topic of at the end of his life, he decided to retire back home. Not retire from hadith, but just go back to his hometown of Bukhara, Samarkand and so forth. When he did do that, it's mentioned, Imam Dhahabi mentions, that there was approximately 3 to 5 kilometers worth of a queue just to invite him and welcome him back to Bukhara. And one of the most famous scholars of Bukhara, I'm going to paraphrase and just give an overview, even though it's quite important in his own context, but in Bukhara you had Imam Muhammad ibn Yahya Dhuhli. So I might just call him Ibn Yahya Dhuhli, just to shorten it. He was the famous and the greatest Shaykh of Bukhara. He was the teacher of Imam Muslim as well. So he had a high status. He had a high links with governors and everyone else. He himself stopped teaching for the day to welcome Imam Bukhari. He had great respect. Now, fast forwarding, Imam Bukhari started teaching the masajid of whatever masjid he was in. And many people left their own teachers, their own sheikhs, to learn from Imam Bukhari. And understandably so. Over time, this hurt Imam Ibn Yahya Dhuhli. It hurt him, and it sowed a seed of jealousy inside him. And that's dangerous. There's jealousy, if it's not treated inside the heart, it grows, manifests itself. Look what happened to Iblis. Look what happened between Habil and Qabil. It all started with jealousy. Later on, it manifests itself into something detrimental. But the same happens here with Imam Ibn Yahya Dhuhli, Imam Muhammad here, where essentially speaking, even Imam Muslim, he left to learn from Imam Bukhari. So his prized possession, his prized student goes to Imam Bukhari. As a matter of fact, I came across an incident, a narration of, I believe his son also went to learn from Imam Bukhari. So it just reignited that fire even more. Long story short, basically you need to know history as well. There was a contentious issue about the Quran, whether it's created or not and so forth. I'm not going to go into it, but point being is that there was a very contentious topic. To think of any contentious topic of today's one, there's many. Okay, Eid being one of them. That's coming up next week. Okay, but that was one of them. And someone asked the question and posed it to Imam Bukhari about this, and Imam Bukhari gave a very technical answer, but a correct one. And it fell beyond the ears of this person. He misunderstood it. He related it to other people, and Imam Ibn Yahya Dhuhli also, he misrepresented the idea and the answer of Imam Bukhari. Now this caused a big thing, because Imam Ibn Yahya Dhuhli, he started to tell people that don't go to Imam Bukhari's lesson. He's left the way of the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And this caused big topics. This wasn't the only issue. There were other things that people started to make up, that, Imam Bukhari has given this fatwa and that fatwa. And just to highlight how detrimental it was, there were many times where Imam Bukhari came to the masjid and he was beaten inside the masjid. People gloss over this part and people forget this part, or don't highlight it for whatever reason. But he was actually beaten really badly many times, not just once, not for 1-2 fatwas which he never gave in the first place, but there were many incidents like this. And again, for shortness of time, I won't be able to go into it, but understand this, that this was a massive topic. Again, remember, this was a man who he's able to throw away 10,000 dirhams for the sake of Islam. He's able to make that sacrifice. He's able to go on for days eating grass for the sake of knowledge. He's able to make these sacrifices. For him to consider leaving Bukhara because of persecution is a big thing. See, if someone like me, anyone that gives me a slap, I'm like, I'm leaving, I'm leaving Tooting or something. But if someone has a word with me, that's our state, Imam Bukhari's state. For him to consider leaving Bukhara is a big thing. And that's where he came down to. Now, at the same time, there was another situation that was taking place at the same time. That was the governor of Bukhara. See, he was very influential, as all governors would be. He wanted Imam Bukhari to come to his palace to teach his sons Islam. Imam Bukhari knew, and there was another topic which, again, with history, you realize, especially at that time, many scholars warned other scholars that do not start teaching and do not have that close link with the governors, because they will try to use you for their aid. They will try to use Islam as propaganda, and they'll use your propaganda and use your name, and you'll have to sell out your Islam because they're paying your wages and so forth. And that's why you find people like Imam Abu Hanifa and so forth, they were, at the end of the days, where were they? They were in jail because they didn't have that relationship with the governor or the rulers. Same thing with Bukhari. He didn't have that relationship. He refused. He said, if you want to learn Islam, come to the teachings like everybody, come to the classes like everybody else. I'm not going to sell my Islam at the doorsteps of your palaces. He was very, very stern on this for many years, or for a period of time. Anyway, the point is, even the governors and the leaders, they start to persecute Imam Bukhari as well in their way. And remember, they're people of wealth, so they can throw some money and get people to get mobs to attack him and so forth. So it was a very trying time. And eventually that led Imam Bukhari to leave Bukhara. And he went towards Samarkand because they invited him. Now, whilst going there, same thing happened. Samarkand, the community split into two parts. There were rumors that spread about him. So he was like, where do I go to? Long story short, he eventually came to a place, and I'm not going to go into the fiqh issues of this, but he was persecuted to such a level that where he eventually made dua. Oh Allah, this land has become tight on me. Essentially in his own words, asking for death. And it was the day before Eid. It was the night before Eid where he passed away. He was going to ride upon his animal, upon his ride. He was about to mount it, and he became ill, and he just passed away. That was the night before Eid. So that concludes it, essentially, the life of Imam Bukhari. But there's a couple of lessons from that. One is that he left a legacy behind, and the other is that you see how dangerous jealousy is. See, jealousy we know is dangerous, but when you have a vision, a goal, and you aspire to become someone, that's when jealousy can afflict you. Because when you're not bothered about life and you have no aim in life, jealousy can still come. But when you're aiming to make money, you're having a goal in life, you're aiming to become, to reach a certain level of academia or anything else, then because you're chasing a goal, jealousy essentially then you're more susceptible towards it. And so scholars are not free from it. That's why it's important to always be considerate of your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and your state of your soul, essentially. Allah speaks about us inside the Quran in many ways, which I'm not going to elaborate upon. But you see Imam Bukhari's steadfastness as well. That he, throughout his persecution, continued to teach hadith. He continued to not give in to the governor's demands and so forth. He did not sell out Islam like many other people may give in. And understandably so as well. Imam Bukhari didn't. The one thing that takes me back is his preparation for death, in the sense that he was ready to pass away. He was able to make that dua. One of us, we would not be able to make that dua whatsoever. Although there's a fiqh issue to making duas like this. But Allah says inside the Quran, Surah Jummah, about the Yahud. Allah says, قل يا أيها الذين هادوا إن زعمتم أنكم أولياء لله من دون الناس فتمنوا الموت إن كنتم صادقين ولا يتمنونه أبدا بما قدمت أيديهم والله عليم بالظالمين. Allah says it because the Yahud of the time, they would say that we are the ones that are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're the ones that are allies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah says that if you truly do claim this claim that you are allies and friends of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then ask for death. Ask for death. Allah says, وَلَا يَتَمَنَّوْنَهُ أَبَدًا. They will never ask for death. Why? Because they know, they're considerate of the things that their hands have done. They know what their actions are. The question is that even though we are mu'mins, we are believers, we are Islam, alhamdulillah, we still are not in a position to say that I'm ready for death. Imam Bukhari was able to do so though. And it's a big thing to be able to do that. It's not that you are forgetting the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but he knew his state of affairs with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, you are hopeful of Allah's mercy. Again, there are many other lessons that a person can learn, but I'm conscious of time, alhamdulillah. I'll need to make my way, inshallah. So we'll leave up till later, inshallah.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Friday Circle podcast. If you want to enjoy more, visit fridaycircle.co.uk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.